secretive billionaire plot to dim the sun has been exposed. This in from the Gateway Pundit today. It says last year California scientists sparked outrage with a botched test on an old aircraft carrier, spraying salt water to create artificial clouds and block sunlight. The tiny Alameda trial lasted just 20 minutes before furious city officials yanked the plug, slamming the team for zero advance notice. The team responsible were involved with the Marine Cloud Brightening program based in the University of Washington. Now, documents exposed by Politico through an open records request to the University of Washington reveal they plotted a far bigger gamble, a multi-million-dollar ocean experiment covering an area larger than Puerto Rico, aimed at cooling the planet. Now, you might have seen that Politico piece floating around. Researchers quietly planned a test to dim sunlight, but they wanted to avoid scaring the public. Hundreds of documents show how researchers failed to notify officials in California about a test of technology to block the sun's rays while they planned a much bigger sequel. This shadowy push, backed by crypto tycoons and elite philanthropists, as well as the advocacy group Silver Lining and the scientific non-profit SRI International, shine a spotlight on how the powerful tinker with our skies without asking everyday Americans. In the over 400 obtained documents, emails and funding pleas show researchers eyed massive tests off North America, Chile or Africa, detectable from space and risking unpredictable weather shifts. University of Washington leaders downplayed it as mere tech checks. Solar geoengineering, like saltwater sprays or stratospheric particles, promises quick cooling, but of course carries huge dangers, as we've discussed on this broadcast, from wrecked farms and wildlife to deadly termination shock if stopped abruptly. Recent studies warn it could spike malaria in poor nations or trigger droughts and hurricanes. Imagine that. Politicians are raging too. Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene tied geoengineering to Texas floods and introduced a bill into Congress seeking to ban the technology. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis outlawed weather-altering chemicals last month. Over 575 scientists have demanded a global halt, arguing fair governance is impossible. In the UK, 2025 revelations of hidden tests amplified calls for oversight, raising concerns on unchecked experiments and their threats to sovereignty. Alameda's fiasco echoes cancelled ScopeX trials in Sweden, where locals and indigenous groups felt sidelined by Harvard elites. The project has since been terminated. Recent outdoor tests like Arctic ice thickening efforts face similar scrutiny for unintended harms. Experts insist community buy-in is essential, not optional, to avoid backlash against playing God with the climate. Without transparency, these billionaire-funded schemes erode faith in science. Is it just me, or does this Politico expose feel like a weak public disclosure attempt for something that has been happening for years, pretending now that they want the public's buy-in and they are, of course, operating in good faith by exposing this secret plot which apparently never went ahead? Newsflash, this has been happening for years. The documentary The Dimming from geoengineeringwatch.org shows us articles from 2018 about how Harvard scientists would be releasing chemicals into the atmosphere as a last-ditch effort to keep the Earth habitable. You can Google search yourself how far back articles about solar engineering have been written. The truth is, there has been a silent agreement between governments all across the world to do this to us for many years, even foreign governments doing it to other countries. This way, it's even harder to track and hold anyone accountable. And even though Tennessee, for example, enacted laws last year to prohibit geoengineering, the fact is that you can conduct these operations from thousands of miles away and still affect that state. You can even do them from another country. So first and foremost, there needs to be a federal ban on it, and secondly, it should be considered an act of war if a foreign nation conducts weather modification operations that affect your country. The Center for International Environmental Law last year released a statement saying that political momentum for solar geoengineering non-use is growing. They referenced the fact that countries across Africa, Latin America, the Pacific, and Europe have signaled their support for the Solar Geoengineering Non-Use Agreement initiative, which is already backed by over 500 multidisciplinary academics and almost 2,000 civil society organizations. They say this week's visible leadership from the Pacific, with Vanuatu's strong call for the non-use and Germany's offer of dialogue on such an agreement, build on the Mexican government's announcement of a national ban in February of 2023, a decision from the African Ministers' Conference on the Environment calling for a non-use in May 23, and a European Parliament resolution calling for the same in November of 23. Such calls echoed in negotiating rooms at the UN Environmental Assembly in February this year, as the Africa Group showed leadership by strongly opposing efforts to undermine the de facto moratorium on geoengineering under the Convention on Biological Diversity, with support from several Global South countries, including Fiji and Colombia and the EU. Additionally, President of Namibia, co-facilitator of the Pact for the Future process, used his September 22 opening address to the Summit of the Future to highlight the dangers of geoengineering. And we've also had Mary Church of the CIEL's geoengineering campaign manager issuing the following statement. She said, "We welcome the growing commitment to non-use of solar geoengineering as governments around the world identify the enormity of the geopolitical, environmental, and social risks inherent to these technologies. Impossible to test for their intended climate impact without large-scale deployment, these highly speculative technologies put billions of people's human rights at risk while giving polluting industries a free pass. Planetary-scale speculative techno-fixes like stratospheric aerosol injection would also likely concentrate power in the hands of a few major players." Imagine that. As harmful impacts of any potential future geoengineering deployment would likely hit those on the front lines of the climate crisis worst, it's not surprising that Global South countries are taking the lead on resisting the normalization of these dangerous distractions. Now, of course, the problem here is that they're referencing this apparent climate crisis, but the reality is if we keep letting these people mess with our weather, which has been operating on its own just fine for thousands of years without any need for human intervention, then we will have a climate crisis, actually, and it will be man-made. Made by the men who keep spraying our skies with toxic poisons that destroy our environment, cause cancer, and God knows what other unintended or intended consequences. It needs to stop.